Power has always been the foundation of Trump's identity, the image he carefully crafted through business ventures, media dominance, and later, political influence. From skyscrapers to television screens to the highest office in the land, he consistently positioned himself as the embodiment of strength, control, and authority. Yet in the courtroom, stripped of the applause of rallies and the loyalty of cheering crowds, power is measured differently. It is measured not by slogans or branding, but by evidence, arguments, and the impartiality of judges who are not swayed by theatrics. This is the stage where influence has little value, where personal narratives cannot rewrite facts, and where power is tested in its rawest form. Trump's courtroom showdown symbolizes the fragile nature of influence when it collides with the force of law, revealing how quickly a carefully built aura of dominance can crumble when subjected to accountability. In the world of politics, Trump has long thrived on portraying himself as the ultimate dealmaker, someone who bends circumstances in his favor. In business, he leaned on negotiation and branding, while in politics, he projected the image of a fighter who never backs down. But legal battles do not bend to charisma or force of will. They demand documentation, facts, and answers to direct questions that cannot be evaded with speeches or slogans. In court, the rules are rigid, and the control shifts away from those who have traditionally wielded power. Trump's discomfort in this arena reflects not only his personal vulnerability but also the larger truth that influence has boundaries. No matter how powerful someone appears in the political arena, the courtroom demands humility in the face of law. The spectacle of this showdown highlights the human side of a figure who often presents himself as larger than life. Every legal maneuver, every testimony, and every objection chips away at the myth of invincibility. What once seemed like an impenetrable wall of influence begins to show cracks, and the image of untouchable power transforms into one of vulnerability. Trump, who has often claimed to dominate the narrative, finds himself trapped in a setting where his words carry consequences beyond public perception. This is not the world of spin and spectacle but the realm of accountability, where even the most powerful must answer for their actions. The fall of power here is not sudden but gradual, each moment revealing the limits of influence. Observers around the nation and across the globe watch with fascination as this courtroom drama unfolds. For supporters, it is a test of loyalty, a moment that challenges their belief in his unshakable strength. For critics, it is validation of long-held arguments about his accountability. For historians, it is a case study in how power eventually faces scrutiny. The very presence of Trump in such a vulnerable position represents a turning of the tide, one that proves no figure, regardless of wealth or political reach, is immune to the mechanisms of justice. The stage is no longer his to command, and in that loss of control lies the true unraveling of power. This moment illustrates the clash between two worlds, the world of politics, where perception often overrides reality, and the world of justice, where reality is laid bare regardless of perception. Trump's greatest strength has always been his ability to control the narrative, to shape public opinion, and to dominate headlines. Yet here, the narrative is not his to control, and headlines are dictated not by his statements but by the decisions of judges and the proceedings of the court. The fall of power is not just about one individual losing his grip. It is about the exposure of how influence fades when the rule of law asserts itself. It is a reminder that in the balance between authority and accountability, the scales eventually tilt toward truth. The psychological impact of such a battle cannot be ignored. For someone who has built his legacy on commanding rooms and projecting dominance, the courtroom represents an environment where that dominance is neutralized. The frustration of being unable to dictate terms, the humiliation of being questioned, and the realization of limited control create a portrait of power at its weakest. Trump's body language, tone, and responses reveal the struggles of a man unaccustomed to being cornered. The very act of being subjected to cross-examination, of having to defend rather than attack, showcases the inversion of power that defines this showdown. Each proceeding is not just a legal step forward but also a symbolic stripping away of the armor of influence. The broader implications of this moment extend beyond Trump himself. It speaks to a universal truth about leadership, accountability, and the inevitable limits of authority. Leaders rise and fall, but what remains constant is the demand for truth and fairness in a system that aspires to equality under the law. The spectacle of a powerful figure brought into the confines of accountability reinforces the democratic principle that no one is above justice. For the public, it is a reminder of the fragility of power and the resilience of systems designed to check it. For future leaders, it is a warning of the consequences of over-reliance on influence without regard for responsibility. As the case progresses, the symbolic weight grows heavier. Each ruling, each piece of evidence, and each exchange in court deepens the contrast between Trump's carefully maintained image of power and the reality of his vulnerability. The fall of power is not always a dramatic collapse but often a slow erosion, visible in small humiliations that accumulate into something undeniable. This is the essence of his biggest showdown, the realization that power, no matter how grand, is not infinite, and when tested in the crucible of justice, it reveals its true limits. The courtroom becomes the ultimate equalizer, the space where power meets accountability and where influence finally faces the undeniable force of truth. Humiliation is not simply the loss of a battle, it is the stripping away of pride, the unraveling of an image carefully built over years, and the exposure of vulnerability that one has always sought to hide. For Trump, the courtroom has become the stage where that humiliation plays out, not in the shadows but in full view of the public and media. His confidence, often portrayed as unshakable, encounters the cold reality of legal questioning and judicial authority. The same man who once dominated headlines with bold proclamations now finds those headlines shaped by setbacks, objections sustained against him, and judges who refuse to entertain theatrics. Each proceeding highlights the difference between commanding a rally and facing a bench of law, and that contrast is where the sting of humiliation deepens, because power and ego clash against structures that refuse to bend. The humiliation is not confined to the legal process itself but extends to the way every moment is dissected and broadcast to the world. Trump, a master of controlling public perception, must now endure the experience of others framing the narrative for him. Every slip in testimony, every visible frustration, and every unfavorable ruling becomes fodder for analysis, memes, and breaking news alerts. The constant replay of these moments magnifies the embarrassment, forcing him to relive each blow as media coverage spreads them beyond the walls of the courtroom. For a figure whose brand has always been tied to dominance, success, and winning, the repeated portrayal of vulnerability is not just uncomfortable but deeply humiliating. It is the erosion of an image that once seemed untouchable. At the heart of this humiliation lies the loss of control. Trump has long thrived on steering conversations, dictating terms, and redirecting focus whenever situations became uncomfortable. In the courtroom, such tactics are neutralized. Interruptions are shut down by judges, evasive answers are pressed upon by opposing counsel, and diversions are blocked by procedure. The rules of this environment deny him the tools he has always used to maintain dominance. The frustration is visible, and in that frustration lies humiliation, because the audience witnesses a man who is used to bending others to his will suddenly being forced to follow rules he cannot bend. Each objection sustained against him, each ruling that goes against his side, reinforces the perception that he is no longer in control of the situation. What makes this humiliation so profound is the contrast between Trump's public persona and his courtroom reality. Outside those walls, he continues to project strength, dismissing legal proceedings as witch hunts and framing himself as a victim of bias. Yet the footage and reporting from inside tell a different story, one where bravado gives way to strained responses, where confidence is tested by direct questioning, and where facial expressions reveal what words cannot hide. The clash between the image he seeks to maintain and the reality unfolding before cameras creates a powerful sense of exposure. This duality, of a man proclaiming victory outside but struggling visibly inside, creates a cycle of humiliation that cannot be contained, because the contradictions are too evident to ignore. Supporters may still rally around him, but even among them, the spectacle of their champion being cornered by legal authority sparks unease. They may cheer his defiance, but they cannot erase the images of him being scolded by a judge or fumbling to defend himself against hard evidence. Critics, meanwhile, seize on these moments as validation, pointing to each stumble as proof of long-ignored accountability. The humiliation thus reverberates through both camps, reshaping perceptions and amplifying the stakes. For his allies, it becomes harder to defend the image of invincibility. For his opponents, it becomes easier to highlight the cracks in his armor. The courtroom humiliation, therefore, transcends the legal sphere and becomes a political weapon wielded by both sides. Humiliation in this context is not just emotional but symbolic. Trump's entire rise was built on the projection of success, gold-plated towers, luxury branding, and an aura of winning at all costs. The courtroom strips that away and replaces it with transcripts, testimonies, and rulings that no amount of branding can polish. The spectacle of being corrected, questioned, or dismissed in a court of law undermines the central myth of perpetual victory. The more he protests, the more those protests seem hollow against the backdrop of legal defeats, and the more his reactions become part of the humiliation itself. This cycle reinforces the perception of a man unprepared for the confines of accountability. The deeper layers of humiliation emerge when one considers the legacy at stake. Every leader, especially one of Trump's stature, is concerned with how history will remember them. For him, these courtroom scenes are not just temporary embarrassments but enduring records. Judges' remarks, witnesses' statements, and rulings are all documented and preserved, waiting to be studied by historians and replayed by media for years to come. The humiliation is therefore not fleeting, it becomes part of the permanent narrative. Unlike political speeches that fade or scandals that are spun into alternate interpretations, courtroom proceedings are fixed in transcripts and judgments. That permanence magnifies the sting, because it ensures the humiliation cannot be erased with time or rhetoric. The emotional toll of humiliation cannot be underestimated either. For someone like Trump, who has built an identity on always appearing strong, the psychological impact of repeated setbacks and public embarrassment compounds over time. Anger, frustration, and denial surface in his reactions, but underneath lies the struggle of reconciling self-image with reality. The courtroom magnifies that struggle, because each session forces a confrontation with limitations he has rarely acknowledged. The humiliation thus becomes not only a public spectacle but a personal crisis, testing resilience in ways political battles never did. Unlike rallies where applause cushions the ego, the courtroom offers no such relief, only a steady drumbeat of challenges and constraints. Ultimately, the humiliation on display in this courtroom showdown is not accidental but inevitable when someone who has built a life on avoiding accountability finally faces its mechanisms. The very structures of justice are designed to reduce ego, to strip away spectacle, and to demand truth under scrutiny. Trump's attempts to resist these structures only heighten the humiliation, because resistance is met with correction, and bravado is met with the impartial authority of law. What emerges is a portrait of power humbled, of confidence shaken, and of image dismantled before a world that has grown used to his dominance. The humiliation is not hidden. It is performed daily on a stage where the audience is vast and the consequences are unrelenting. Every era is marked by defining moments that go beyond the individuals at the center of them, and this courtroom showdown stands as one such turning point. The spectacle of Trump facing the most consequential legal battle of his term is not just about his personal humiliation or vulnerability but about what it represents for the broader political and judicial landscape. History is shaped when institutions prove their strength, when laws assert their permanence, and when leaders are reminded that authority is not absolute. The outcome of this case, whatever direction it takes, will reverberate far beyond Trump himself, influencing the way justice is perceived and how future leaders approach accountability. The weight of this moment lies not only in its immediate consequences but also in the precedent it sets for generations to come. This turning point signals a shift in how political power is tested against the justice system. For decades, powerful figures have often relied on influence, wealth, or position to evade scrutiny, creating a perception that the law bends for the privileged. Trump's confrontation with the courts challenges that perception by placing him squarely within the mechanisms of justice, under the same rules and procedures that govern ordinary citizens. This equalizing effect is powerful, because it underscores the idea that democratic institutions, when functioning as intended, treat all individuals with the same standard of accountability. The symbolic weight of seeing a former president pressed for answers and constrained by the authority of the court represents a recalibration of the balance between leadership and law. What makes this moment even more significant is its visibility. Unlike past political scandals or quiet settlements, this showdown unfolds in an era of instant communication, where every gesture and ruling is analyzed in real time across media platforms. The accessibility of information means that millions of people, both in the United States and abroad, witness the unfolding of justice as it happens. This visibility magnifies the importance of the event because it demonstrates the workings of accountability on a global stage. For allies and adversaries alike, the image of an American leader facing such scrutiny becomes a symbol of both the fragility and resilience of democratic systems. The message is clear: no matter how much influence one holds, the structures of justice remain powerful enough to assert themselves. The turning point is also political, shaping the trajectory of debates and elections. Trump's courtroom battles become rallying cries for his supporters, who frame him as a victim of persecution, and for his critics, who present them as proof of long overdue accountability. This duality reflects the polarized nature of the political environment, but it also reveals how deeply legal battles can influence public opinion and political momentum. The proceedings blur the line between law and politics, making the courtroom not just a legal space but a theater where narratives about power, justice, and fairness are contested. Every development becomes ammunition for one side or the other, deepening the stakes of the showdown and ensuring its place as a historical milestone. In addition to political implications, this moment carries profound cultural significance. Trump has long been more than a politician; he has been a cultural figure, shaping conversations, influencing media, and commanding public attention. His courtroom struggles therefore represent more than legal challenges; they symbolize a cultural reckoning with figures who rise to prominence through spectacle and branding. The fallibility of such a figure, exposed under the strict light of judicial inquiry, sends a broader message about the limits of celebrity, charisma, and influence. It is a reminder that cultural icons, no matter how dominant, remain subject to the fundamental principles that govern society. This confrontation with reality marks a cultural shift toward valuing accountability over performance. The historical resonance of this showdown is amplified by its timing. At a moment when public trust in institutions is fragile and political polarization is at unprecedented levels, the sight of a former president facing justice becomes a litmus test for the strength of democracy. If the proceedings are carried out with fairness and transparency, they may restore confidence in the system's ability to hold even the most powerful accountable. If they falter, they risk deepening cynicism and reinforcing divisions. Either way, the moment stands as a decisive turning point, one that reveals the condition of democracy itself. Trump's case becomes not only about his actions but about whether the system can withstand the pressures of power and partisanship. This showdown also prompts a re-evaluation of leadership. For years, Trump has defined leadership on his own terms, equating it with defiance, dominance, and the rejection of norms. In court, those definitions are tested against legal standards and societal expectations. The result is a confrontation between two models of authority, one based on personality and charisma, and the other rooted in laws and institutions. The turning point lies in which model ultimately prevails, because the outcome will shape how future leaders perceive their own boundaries. If the law prevails, it reasserts the principle that leadership must coexist with accountability. If defiance appears to succeed, it risks encouraging future figures to test the limits of authority even further. Beyond the United States, the impact of this turning point is felt internationally. Global observers see the trial as a measure of American credibility, testing whether the nation that champions democracy abroad practices those same principles at home. The handling of Trump's showdown sends a message to both allies and adversaries about the integrity of American institutions. For allies, it may reassure them of America's commitment to justice; for adversaries, it may expose vulnerabilities or hypocrisy. In this way, the courtroom drama becomes part of the larger story of America's role on the world stage, where the credibility of democratic ideals is constantly scrutinized. Perhaps the most profound aspect of this turning point is its permanence. Court proceedings are not fleeting campaign moments or soundbites that fade with the next news cycle. They are recorded, transcribed, and preserved as part of the historical record. Generations will look back at this moment as a defining episode in the Trump era, one that encapsulates the tension between power and accountability. The legacy of this showdown will not only shape Trump's reputation but will also serve as a reference point for discussions about justice, leadership, and democracy in the future. It is a reminder that history is often defined not by victories or defeats alone but by the moments when systems are tested and societies are forced to confront their values.